Yes. Hello,
Please,
everyone.
sorry, please everyone, go ahead and mute yourself.
Go ahead, Desiree. Yes, so first off, Elise is going to share my presentation because for some reason I can't. Firefox won't allow me to share anything. So I hope this is going to work out somehow, but I'm quite sure it is. So yes, hello everyone and happy welcome to my small presentation on cross-cultural communication. As Nora already said, I'm Swiss, yes, and I'm a journalist and currently a master's student in digital marketing at the Lucerne University of Applied Sciences and Arts. Now you might find yourself asking, why is she talking to us about cross-cultural communication? Well, I've worked in recruiting myself for quite some time, that's one. Another one is that I'm married to a non-Swiss, and then most of my friends also are not Swiss, and I kind of accompanied them when they first got here to get them used to the Swiss culture, let's put it that way. Yes, you can go on, please. Next slide. So one thing that I wanted to show you when I think of Swiss people in the work context or whatever, what I've heard a lot from my friends is that they don't understand why. When you ask a Swiss whether they want to go out for drinks in the evening, they're either hesitant, they might say maybe, but what they mean in the end always is no. And now how come? Next slide, please. I would say what's very important when we look at this, but not, I mean, doesn't only go for Swiss people, obviously, but like in general, you always have things that you see when you think of culture and identity and things that you don't. So, I mean, we see how people act, but we don't really know why they act the way they do. And I personally want to look with you at the iceberg analogy that we have on the right. Next slide, please. Yes. So as I said, like you have behaviors and practices. So that could mean, for example, the festivities that you have in a country, you know, the punctuality in Switzerland when we look at the trains. And then you have the hidden goods. The biggest chunk is hidden, which is the perceptions, the attitudes, beliefs, and values that we all have. Next slide. So now, what is culture if we wanted to sum it up? Okay, so the sum of intellectual and artistic activities and the products or artifacts, then the learned behavior. Then when we think of work, mostly what we talk about when we talk about culture is the set of ideas, beliefs, and ways of behaving of a particular organization or a group of people. But what culture is, at least to me, or what I would say is the most fitting description of culture or definition is the culture is a whole way of life which is constantly evolving, changing, and adapting to the circumstances necessary. I mean, that's especially true when you find yourself in another country, right? Okay, next slide, please. There is this one thing when we talk about when you get to know someone, right? We have the coconut personalities and the peach personalities. So that's on an individual level. The one on the left side, obviously, is the coconut personality. Now, what does that mean? It means they have a very hard core to get through them. So when you start talking to them, they might be hesitant. They will not tell you a lot about their personal lives, most likely, and they'll just be, you know, hesitant and waiting and see what's happening. And then maybe at some point they'll open up if you're lucky. And then we have the peaches, which are quite not the opposite, I would say, but they're easier to talk to generally. They're more sociable and they are more likely to talk to you about their lives from the very start. Could even be that they talk to you about their relationship problems, even though you've met them only twice. And then if you want to understand culture, I mean, as I said earlier, like the iceberg is like the simplest visualization of culture, I would say. But then the Geert Hofstede has defined or identified 6 different dimensions. He calls it power distance. That's basically how likely is it for you to walk into your CEO's office and just tell him, Jeff, how about we have lunch today? Then we have indulgence versus restraint, where it's about how likely are people to fully enjoy themselves, let's say in their free times, or like how conscious are they about certain rules that they should not break, let's say. Then we have long-term versus short-term orientation. I mean, that's obvious. So when you make plans, are they long-term or rather short-termed? Then we have one that he calls masculinity versus femininity, which I find a bit difficult nowadays, but well, I'll just stick to his terminology now. And in masculinity, you just are very competitive and you don't really care much about well-being whatsoever. And in the femininity, it's more about getting a better life. Then we have the tolerance of uncertainty. How tolerant is a society when it comes to uncertain events? And then the individuality, like how much do you refer to yourself as an individual when you make plans or when you think further to the future? Next slide. And then now, as we said, I'm trying to show you a bit how it is in Switzerland. And for this, I just checked it up on Hofstede Insights. I highly recommend everyone to visit that page once, because you can basically look up every country there is and then compare them to each other. And it's quite interesting to see. So to me, what was interesting when I got the results was that we have a relatively low power distance, because I would say, depending on the company you work in, it's not very likely that you walk into your CEO's office and just ask him out for a coffee. I mean, you can try, but might not end well. That's one. And then the uncertainty avoidance, I figured is rather low, because I would say that Swiss are the ones that will plan everything, if possible, 30 years to the future. And then what I found especially interesting is that they said that the uncertainty avoidance in the French-speaking part is apparently higher than it is in the German-speaking. And yes, the scale is 1 to 200 to answer your question, Aniko. Yes, we can go on, please. So as I think most of you aspire to work somewhere, if you don't do so already in Switzerland, I figured it would be helpful if we just show you that there are quite more dimensions of culture. And obviously, there are other theories on that. So I'm not saying that those are the ones, but I'm just saying those are the ones that I personally find most helpful. And we have Erin Meyer, which is an American author, and she wrote the book, The Culture Map. And there she came up with 8 more that she deems to be important or helpful when you find yourself, especially in work context. So you have communicating, for example, you have this high versus low context. So in Switzerland, it is very, in Switzerland, it is quite unlikely that someone will just tell you to do a task without telling you exactly what you need to do. At least that's my experience. If they want to make sure that you know what you're doing, they will explain to you in every detail possible what you have to do, and then you better stick to what you've been told to do. Then we have the evaluating, the direct versus the indirect feedback. This, of course, refers mainly to negative feedback. And there, I would say Swiss try to be direct, but they never are. Like, they will always tell you that maybe if you could, it would be great if. So you have a lot of ifs and a lot of conjunctives, which is, for example, the biggest difference, I would say, between Germans and Swiss people in general. We're always talking about tendencies here, no stereotypes. Very important to remember. And then you have this persuading, like what is more important, the principles behind or the application. So are you more of a doer or more of a going to think it through and then maybe do it at some point? Then you have the leading, which is important, obviously. Is it top down or bottom up, or like how is it led? Then deciding goes into the same, like, is it consensual? Or yeah, and with the leading also, it's important, like how big to what extent are you going to be asked as an employee if they make a decision? Are they even interested, or they just tell you, it would be great if you could tell us what you think about it, and then in the end, they're never gonna really look at your ideas anyways. So then you have this trusting, where we have the task-based versus the relationship-based. We could say that's, let's say you have a seniority in a field, but they'll give the task to the son of the boss anyways, because he's his son. So then you have the disagreeing, whether someone is confrontational or not. I think that's one of the most important ones to keep in mind when you are at work. In your personal life, just, try to think of, not everyone might be as direct as you are, or not everyone might like avoiding conflict as much as you do. And then we have the scheduling. Do you approach something linearly, or are you more flexible and just, try to find your way somehow? Yes, we can continue. So now I would like you all to go to the break rooms. I think a group of 4 to 5 people should be fine for this exercise. First, I wanted to really come up with, like situation that you find yourself in, and then like how to solve this problem. But the reason why I started away from this is that I personally would say, even though we're in Switzerland and, there are certain things that I could say they're rather like this or that. So I try to bring that in as well. Always keep in mind that culture, even within Switzerland, highly differentiates from place to place, from company to company, from family to family. So there is no right or wrong really to this. So that's why I decided instead to come up with those 3 questions. Yes, please feel free to discuss, and then also I'm open for questions, obviously, if you have any. It's always like, obviously, what can the employer do? Like, he can try to make sure he has rules set in place that are clear to everyone, so that there are no misunderstandings whatsoever, what is expected from all the employees. But what can you do, be it in the work environment or in your private environment? And I would say there are 2 things you can and should do. One is really try to see things or situations through the eyes of your partner or your colleague. That will help you with a lot of things. There is one, like when I think of my relationship with my husband, for example, he's from a background where belonging to a group and having a family plays a very important role. And I'm Swiss, so to me, my family is my sisters, my parents, and maybe 1 or 2 aunts that I have are also kind of okay. But other than that, I don't really care much about the rest. And it's like, to me, it was very hard to understand that someone you've met like twice in the street can be your brother, for example. So those are things that you should keep in mind. Okay, that's the upbringing, that's how people are raised and how they were imprinted, basically. And then the other thing that you should do is really, we all have those stereotypes, right? They do exist. So whether you call it cultural generalization or stereotype, and where you make the line, that highly depends on, how you look at it. But I think it's important that you address them. Just address them. Like if you meet someone and you're not sure about it, just ask. It's so easy. Like basically just ask people, nothing bad is going to happen to you. That's all I can say to this. And now, like I've come across those 2 books. The one is from Mayer, the one that I already mentioned. I think it's, it can help a lot. I would say she's been living here for over 20 years now. And the one on the right-hand side is more on how identity is formed and how basically people perceive you and who you are. And yes, this whole process of identity. creation. Yeah, that's about it from my side.